and welcome back to the most amazing channel on the internet. I'm your host Rebecca Felgate, and today we're talking about the top 10 things that would happen if Vladimir Putin died. Now, Putin is one of the most powerful people in the world. He was Prime Minister of Russia from 2000 to 2012, after which he bagged the top job as president of one of the world's most powerful countries. Putin is 65 and looks set to hold on to power for years to come. Rumors of his death were trending on Twitter in 2015, sending some people into a frenzy. But what if he really did die? What would it mean for Russia? Before I jump into this most amazing list, I just want to remind you guys to hit that thumbs up button. Also, why not click on that big beautiful notification bell if you want to be the first to hear our new videos. Also guys, please don't forget to leave me a comment letting me know what you think would happen if Vladimir Putin did die. So here is what we think would happen. Again, I say think because Russia is a country that keeps its cards close to its chest. It's only really possible to speculate. Starting things off at number 10, the cause of death would be determined. If Vladimir Putin died in the next few years, it would come as quite the shock. Once again, he is currently 65 years old and in pretty good health, although he did cancel several public appearances earlier on this year. If the cause of death was natural, it would be quite a shock as he is still pretty young. If he was killed by a Russian politician in the way that some Russian diplomats have been bumped off in the past, I imagine the chain of command would be pretty high. The whole thing would be subject to some kind of cover-up. It would be very mysterious. It'd be really interesting to see who then took power. If Putin died as a result of an international assassination, then it could have pretty terrifying consequences for those involved. Could it mean war? Possibly. Coming in at number 9, his death would be covered up for around 48 hours. Unless it was publicly obvious that Putin had died, his death would be hushed up for a couple of days while the Russian chain of command reshuffled itself. Also, they'd be wanting to make an emergency response plan. Countries are always most vulnerable during states of emergency, and as Putin is such a synonymous figure with this state, it would be important to break the news to the Russian people properly. Coming in at number 8, the Russian military would be placed on high alert. Like we mentioned, countries are always the most vulnerable when in a state of emergency. If their president were to die, the country would be momentarily weakened. Any Russian enemy could choose that time to kick their foes while they're down, which would not be ideal for the global superpower. During the period of comprehension following Putin's death, measures would be put into place to keep the country safe. Coming into number 7, it would make worldwide headlines. Once the news was out, it would make worldwide headlines. There hasn't been a death of a high-profile political leader in charge of a world superpower since the assassination of JFK in the 60s. Vladimir Putin is a household name, an icon synonymous with Russia. His death would come as a shock not just to those who are politically minded, but to everyone. Of course, if 2015 is any indication, Twitter would be awash with the trending news. Many would rightfully wonder what this means for the Eurasian powerhouse. Of course, those wondering wouldn't be alone. At number 6, worldwide political leaders would react. It would be especially interesting to see how the European Union, the United States, and how China dealt with the news. As we know, Russian-American relations have been tense for generations, as have relations with the EU. As the world superpowers grapple for a stronghold, it would be interesting to see how a moment of destabilization in Russia would affect the other key players. Of course, on the surface, there would be the usual outpourings of condolences from worldwide leaders. Who knows what gem the 45th Prez would think up for his colourful Twitter stream. Coming into number 5, there would be a temporary president. So there is actually, surprisingly, a Russian constitution which lays out what would happen if a leader dies. The Russian Prime Minister would become acting president for 90 days whilst organising a new election. At the moment, this is Dmitry Medvedev. At this time, he couldn't really dissolve any kind of legislature or make any new laws, so really the role is pretty ceremonious. His main responsibility in those 90 days would be organising a new election. Coming into number 4, there would be a big Russian power struggle. While Dmitry Medvedev would run for president, the road wouldn't be easy. He himself has been president before. He would face some competition from Dmitry Peskov, Putin's right-hand man and press secretary. Russia is pretty corrupt, and the power structure would be rattled if Putin died. He's currently in charge of all the immunity and money deals. On his death, powerful Russians would make shifty agreements and deals with one another ahead of the elections. It would likely be a bit of a game of musical chairs. Coming into number 3, Russia would mourn. Putin would have a state funeral, and the day he was laid to rest would be a national day of mourning. The ceremony would be broadcast live on the main Russian state television channels, and mourners would line the streets of Moscow, where I presume the funeral would take place. Other heads of state may well also be in attendance. Now, it is possible that Putin could have a church service, like the state funeral of Boris Yeltsin. His funeral was held at the Cathedral of Christ the Saviour in Moscow. Putin would receive an artillery salute, and his coffin would be draped in the Russian national flag. Following the death of such an influential being in Russia, there would be a lot of lasting questions in his wake that perhaps wouldn't be answered straight away. So therefore, at number 2, the lasting question on everyone's lips would be, what would happen to Russia's nuclear weapons? Putin has been very pro-nuclear development, and at times he's revealed the Kremlin's naked ambition to reaffirm Russia's status as the #1 nuclear power. In March 2018, Putin unveiled invincible nuclear weapons. Now, Putin has been the driving force at the forefront of nuclear development, but would the new president of Russia be so nuclear focused? A lot of questions. Finally, one of the most dramatic things that could happen if Vladimir Putin died, we have Russia could break up. An in-depth article on nextbigfuture.com suggests that if Vladimir Putin died, Russia could break up. While I think that this is somewhat unlikely, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. Chechnya is heavily funded by the Kremlin, but if this were to change, the region may find itself less loyal. The region of Tartazan may also look to break away. The area is home to 2 million Muslim ethnic Tatars and 1.5 million ethnic Russians. The Tartazan region has ties with problematic Crimea too. Perhaps the Ukraine would look to take its land back. So there we have it, guys. Those are the top 10 things that could happen if Vladimir Putin died. What do you think to this list? What do you think would happen? Let me know in the comments section down below. Also, would you like us to make more lists about the worldwide leaders dying? Let me know. I'm your host, Rebecca Felgate. If you want to connect with me on social media, my links are in the description box down below. Hi, it's me again, wearing a different outfit. Why? Because we all need a costume change when we're replying to comments. It's the law, but only for this video. So the comments I'm replying to are from the scary Slender Man sightings video. Yeah, if it was appropriate to move from Vladimir Putin's death to Slender Man. Seamless, really. Unlike Vladimir Putin, Slender Man probably isn't real. Nonetheless, there have been some scary sightings out there, and you had loads to say about them. The top comment was from Cody Whitlock, who was quoting one of my little quips from the video. Basically, a nude-looking Slender Man was bopping down a chimney, and I said he was like a weird, creepy, naked Slender Santa. Cody enjoyed it, and I'm glad. But if Santa could just keep all of his clothes on in the future and Slender Man could GTFO, then great. Some of you pointed out that you thought that the Gravity Falls Slender Man sighting is fake, which I get, but like, aren't they all fake because Slender Man arguably isn't real? Or do we think that he is? Banana King Power wrote, "Not everything without a face is Slender Man." Then tell me, Banana King, what is? What is? Oh, that's okay. Diva Gold wrote, "Number 2 just looks like a man in a suit with a white mask on, and the picture of Slender Man creeping up on the kids is so creepy." I agree, very creepy. I also like your name, Diva Gold. I feel like a bit of a Diva Gold today. Does my top look gold on camera? It's like a gold velvet. Mia Bartlett wrote, "The first one looks more like the Rake." I mean, isn't the Slender Man the Rake? I'm confused. We have a very interesting comment from Ya Reaper Plays, who said, "My grandma saw Slender Man. She said she was a little girl in Honduras, that's where she's from. She was walking to throw away the trash when she saw a tall man in a suit and tie with a white face floating. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true." Well, there he is, in Honduras. We've got a little poem from Puglover21 who wrote, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. 3, 4, lock the door. 5, 6, get a crucifix. 7, 8, stay up late. 9, 10, never sleep again. And watch out for slender men. That is quite the ditty if I ever heard one. Inventive. I love inventive comments here, so if anyone wants to make a song about Slender Man, like, I will literally sing it. If anyone wants to teach me an interpretive slender dance, I'll do it. This is one I can think of. It's me being slender and creepy. Hope you like it. Okay, so we had some weird feedback from Mystic Zodia who wrote, "It creeps me out whenever Rebecca says hello." Cool. Great. It creeps me out when I think someone's watching me and I turn around and no one's there, but if a simple hello does it for you, what can I say? Dean Londo wrote a little something to give us some background on Slender Man. He said, I heard he started from Germany as a tall, faceless peasant in the woods where his wife and unborn child died because people thought she was a witch. So he stalked, kidnapped children and forced them to speak out about their wrongdoings, but over time America changed him to kidnap children, tamper with electronics and wear his signature suit and tie. Guys, commas and full stops really help when reading comments. Just comment and feedback from me. Other than that though, that is very interesting. I feel like a lot of creepy stories do have their origins in Germany and Denmark, so it would make sense. Also, does Slender Man tamper with electronics? Is that a thing he does? Because if so, ooh. You can creep around being all tall and murderous and whatever, but don't mess with my Wi-Fi bro. Finally, HCJ wrote, nice outfit Rebecca. Thanks babe, thanks. So I had all kinds of fun reading out those comments. This is kind of something new that we're trying here at Most Amazing Top 10, so do keep leaving us comments if you want us to read them out, and also keep leaving them anyway because sometimes I jump in there like a little creep and reply to you because that's what I like doing. Also, I just wanted to say once again a huge thank you to everyone that came to our meetup. We had the best day and we're hoping to do more meetups across the country and across other countries too, so if you are in a city and you want us to come to you, then please do let me know because I really enjoyed meeting you guys and you let us know that you love spooky videos, so we'll keep on making more. Thank you for that, thank you for sticking around for the comments, and I'm gonna leave different clothed me to round out the video just because costume change. For now, if you like this video, make sure you give it a good thumbs up, share with a friend, and stay subscribed for more Most Amazing lists. Bye!